Hello, this is Craig Mertens, Director of Product Education for Inktavo, the parent company of SignTracker, Inksoft, Printavo, Graphicsful, and Clarity. And if you haven't heard, we have merged with Order My Gear. So our family is growing. Joe and I are members of the Founders Club. Joe was the founder of SignTracker. I was the founder of Digital Art Solutions, which was later evolved into GraphicsFlow. So we have kind of a unique experience in the industry, kind of grew up around it. My family ran I guess in today's dollars, a $30 million a year decorated apparel screen printing business. And Joe actually owned a sign shop. Joe, say hi to the viewers here today and a little quick bio on yourself and how you got into this crazy business.
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Joe, founder of SignTracker, and have been in the sign industry for about 30 years now. Got into the business, basically answered an ad in the paper back then because Indeed.com did not exist for media sales. And it was a dumpy little sign shop, but it looked interesting. So I took the job, and man, it's like everybody else in the sign industry. Once you're in, you're hooked, you're sucked in. And so here I am. But yeah, I've had the opportunity to start 2 sign shops from scratch. Started the company from scratch, grew it to about 60 employees, had a almost 60,000 square foot shop. We did things, a lot of national rollouts, pylon signs, all the way up to we did the Dallas Cowboy Stadium. So that big AT&T sign you see over the dome, my company did all that. And then I sold the business and ended up dedicating myself full time to getting SignTracker rolling. And that was a long, slower process than I thought. So I ended up starting another sign shop with my daughter, who is running it very successfully today. And she is my sidekick. We are co-hosts of the Behind the Signs podcast. And I spend a lot of time kind of working with sign shops through Behind the Signs.
I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. So we already introduced ourselves. We're your host. There's the correct spelling for Joe. And the reality of running a sign shop. So there's a lot going on in a sign shop.
There is.
You got a lot of things going on simultaneously happening at once. And, a lot of times job stages overlap and you got, one department doing one thing and another department doing the other thing, but we're aiming towards a common goal. And, the owner becomes kind of the central hub in that, the go-to person. And that's why the owner gets 27 emails and 63 text messages when they're on vacation. And they can never relax. And information gaps open up pretty fast. And, when you're missing information and you're trying to run a shop, it can be pretty frustrating. And, that can actually impact, in my opinion, can impact the customer experience. It's kind of a downstream impact. And then as soon as you start to grow, that's where all your weaknesses get exposed. And, you can keep it together at a certain size, but I think most shops get to a certain size where they're growing and they're like, wow, we need to do something. Joe, what's your thoughts on that?
It's funny, you think about sign shops, right? Most of them are smaller and they have maybe under 10 employees. And you think, this is a really simple business. But there is so many moving parts. It's a job shop, right? So every order is unique. I mean, yes, you have repeat orders, but there's so many moving parts. And it starts with depending on what kind of signs you do, you're out in the field, you're doing surveys, you're managing information that has to be passed on to somebody else who's interpreting it and doing a design. And then there's materials and fabrication, installation, permanent. I mean, there's so many moving parts. And for a small little business, sign shops are pretty complicated to run. And that's only counting the job side of it, my friend. We're not even talking about like when you get to hiring employees and managing employees, and sometimes it can get like herding cats on telling somebody, what they're supposed to do every day and managing that. So,
and you look at why shops get stuck. Man, old habits feel comfortable. Why are you doing it that way? Because that's the way I've always done it. Whiteboards, spreadsheets. They work for a while. But at some point, if you're planning on growing, you kind of, outpace them. And, everybody has a different tolerance for risk. One of my favorite coaching quotes is the biggest risk of all is not taking a risk. And if you really let that sink in, nothing changes if nothing changes, right? So sometimes if you have to get through a little bit of pain before you're motivated, and growing pains for sign shop can be honestly pretty painful. I don't ever run into shops that they're just wake up one morning and says, I'm ready to transition to something better and more productive. They usually get there over a period of time. And one thing I always like to identify, there is no perfect time to change. You can keep kicking the can down the road as long as you want, but the problems stay with you. But training is so important. And, we just don't want to get to the point where chaos feels like the norm. People will adapt to chaos. But, that doesn't support growth. And what are your thoughts on that, Joe?
well, I mean, I hear a lot over the years with SignTracker, right? Oh, we're just too busy. We're too busy to do this thing that's going to make us more money, feel more in control, which, because I think busyness can sometimes be interpreted as success.
Right.
And what happens is the chaos, like you said, it starts to feel normal. And, a lot of times small business owners, myself included, right? Like if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But the problem is it is broke and it's stressing you personally. It's stressing the business. It's stressing employees. And so that's the stuck point there, and it's hard. It is hard to get out of that mindset. But if you trust your gut and you do it and you make that leap, it's huge. Recognize the things that are, your stuck points, right? Like try to recognize them, even though it's hard to think about changing. It's worth it. It's worth it.
Start with the immediate need. You don't have to change everything at once.
Right.
That creates a lot of friction with your staff. Figure out what the immediate need is. What is the immediate problem that we're facing? Well, we can't get quotes out fast enough. That'd be a great place to start with a shop management software, is getting your arms around quoting. But, you realize what you're doing right now isn't working. Things are breaking down and you don't need to do something. And then stage 2 is adoption and implementation. That's when you commit to a solution, you get your staff trained up on it, you implement it, and it just becomes the way you do things. And when you get to that point, you can never go back. You just can't. You can never go back. And then you do have this kind of moment of clarity where you're like, man, I should have done this a long time ago. I've heard that so many times. And then stage 3 is my favorite, which is the restoration of sanity and life balance. Because, running a chaotic shop and doing everything manually, it's a lot of work. I mean, and especially if you're the business owner, you can keep all the balls in the air. You can, but as soon as something breaks down, and then the balls start dropping because everything's dependent on you. And, you have to be able to obviously build repeatable processes, especially when you get to that point when you're selling your business. That's one of the first things that the new owner is going to ask when they're negotiating a price with you is, what's your tech stack look like? What are you guys using to manage the shop? What's your social media presence look like? Do you have repeatable processes? Do I have to be dependent on you for any period of time once we sign over the business? Those kind of things. Your thoughts on this, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, just to put a period at the end of what you just said, when I sold my big shop and we sold it to a big national electrical contracting company, they didn't ask to see our books at first. They asked to see our system and how we managed workflow. And because it creates a huge value to the business. It's really true. I mean, having systems in place will restore sanity to the business, for the employees, and I think for owners personally too.
My business mentor once told me, says the real test of your management skills is if you can leave on vacation and come back and everything's still running. Everybody starts, they get to their breaking point. Jobs start slipping. You can only get so far on paper and Post-it notes, right? Or texts and emails. Oh, I didn't read that email. I get so many emails. It got buried in my spam folder. Hey, did you update the spreadsheet? Production slows down without a warning. So all of a sudden you got this bottleneck. And the first step you have to do in a bottleneck is trace it backwards to where it got clogged up, where to get clogged up. And if you're like any other shop, you probably have a couple of places that are just inherent bottlenecks, like the art department or the accounting department. Hey, we have not gotten paid for the last order. We can't ship the next one. Team communication breaks down. So people stop trusting. That's a huge problem in a shop when people stop trusting their coworkers or the process. Everybody kind of starts isolating. Things get very siloed and you become reactive instead of proactive. And I think that's the biggest thing I see with shops that don't have a good organizational system in place is they're always just reacting to things. They're never like thinking ahead about putting in preventative measures or something as simple as standard operating procedures. So those are kind of typical type, breaking points. And Joe, what were some of your breaking points when you're in the shop, where you decided, hey, I just need to get organized?
And it's okay. And we all have them. Like, I don't think you need to feel like if like Craig said earlier, it's never too late to adopt systems or make changes, and I look back at those times and I don't feel like hey, Joe, this is stupid. It was being a failure in business. It was just recognizing that something had to change.
That kind of segues over to this next slide, why manual tools stop working. In our screen printing shop, we were processing about 6,000 orders per season. And we were managing all that on Whiteboards and job jackets. If you don't know what a job jacket is, it's a big old manila envelope. They come pre-printed. They have little spots so you can write dates and notes and assign things to people and check boxes. And sometimes people get those custom printed with their job stages on it. My dad would never say no to a rush order ever. And so he would take a rush order and then you're sitting there scribbling on the whiteboard. And I talked to my dad's production manager in the last year. He reached out to me on LinkedIn and I interviewed him about, what it was like back in, the early 90s working for my dad. And he says, yeah, it was chaos because your dad would never say no to a rush order and he would wipe out my beautiful whiteboard.
Thankfully, in today's, small business world, there's so many tools, cloud-based tools that will help you be able to access information from anywhere, anytime. And so a lot of these problems can definitely go away,
Yeah. And, you talk about like spreadsheets, and spreadsheets are great. I think it's a really good step once you start implementing spreadsheets, but spreadsheets don't interact with anything. They're just a static file on a server somewhere. So, reporting or connecting with customer databases or even your accounting functionality, they're kind of like little standalone tools, but they're certainly big helpers. And you don't honestly have a lot of visibility when you have these kind of hobbled together manual systems. And a lot of it has to be reliant on memory. Where would you be today if you had put in systems? And Joe, what are your thoughts on that?
It's never too early, right? Like I think in talking with people over the years, like, oh, I'm just a one-person shop. That's okay. One-person shop still has to figure out where the jobs are at, what tasks have to be done, what materials need to be ordered, if the quoting is going to be consistent. So I think if that's the question you're asking me, when is a good time or to start, it's right from the beginning, but it's never too late to change either. I mean, change can happen at a stage in the business, but I would say, everything you're saying here and these points are really true. I mean, I think that in the heavy reliance on memory, i.e. the owner carries a lot of it. And because even with manual, even with spreadsheets and all that, yeah, you can do a lot of really cool things, but that is a lot of work building out that stuff and then training staff on using it. And it, like you said, creates pricing errors because the spreadsheets and stuff, formulas tend to break and someone copies over it, or there's lots of different things that can go wrong with that. That's for sure.
If you're starting a shop and it's a new business, start with your tech stack. Don't grow into it. It's a minimal investment. Start with your tech stack so you're doing it right from day one, not saying, well, I'm going to wait till I have enough business until I get my act together. Well, if you get your act together up front, the business is going to come a lot sooner. And so, this kind of leads me to my next thought is like general business software where it falls short. We talk to tons of customers that are using what I call hobbled together technology pieces. They use QuickBooks for accounting. They use Monday CRM for their pipeline management. They use Excel spreadsheets or Trello or Meister Task kind of manage their projects. And guess what? None of those things are built for the sign industry. It's all fun and games until you have to quote something. You quote a electrical sign completely different than you do a yard sign versus a vehicle wrap versus a banner versus, ADA laser, all the different crazy things that we're doing in sign shops. And so quoting is definitely the one thing where these generic platforms really fall, short, and they're not communicating with each other. So everything's out on its own little island and none of this stuff is communicating with each other. So independently, they do a good job, but collectively, it's a pretty big step back when things aren't talking.
Harder to manage it, right? And to train people and all that stuff. So the simpler you can keep it, obviously, the better.
And then reporting. That's the thing when I'm talking to folks that have kind of those hobbled together systems, because nothing's talking, you're not getting reporting. So your quoting is not connected to your project management, which is not connected to your books. And I think that's actually a huge disadvantage of these hobbled together systems. When you're looking at kind of the tools that are out in the marketplace and in shop management, I'm going to kind of call them out by class. So you have cross industry platforms. They kind of do it all. So they're going to do, apparel and awards and signage and, commercial printing. They kind of do it all, but they don't necessarily do it all well. They just do it all. And sometimes when you're, focused over such a wide range of kind of industries and processes, you're not really good at any singular one. And those systems, in my opinion, tend to get pretty bloated. They have a lot of extra stuff. And that creates a lot of complexity in the learning curve, right? And then you have these like super complicated like enterprise level systems. And what I mean by that is if you're running a sign franchise, doesn't matter which franchise it is, you have to keep track of a lot more information than an individual independent sign shop does, because you have to report all that data back to the mothership, so the mothership gets their piece, their royalties, right? So there's a lot of back end things that have to exist that create a lot of complexity in the sign. And so if you're a small independent, say less than 15 person shop, you probably don't need all that complexity, and you certainly don't want to pay for it. Legacy desktop software, this is becoming a huge problem, because there's some programs out in the marketplace that are end of life, that are not being continued, and they're desktop software, meaning they're installed onto a local computer, or there's a server and they're installed and they're communicating with the server. Everything's going to cloud. When I get a new computer, I just log in. I don't have to install anything. So these legacy programs that don't have a clear migration path to a cloud-based system, they're not being updated. That's a huge problem. And people end up being kind of technology orphans, which is a real bummer when you get computer problems. And all of a sudden your computer that was reliable doesn't work anymore because there's some crazy Windows update that just happened that took it out. So that's a big problem. And then you do have, more like manufacturing based tools that were built for, like, say, purely for electrical signage. And there's a lot of really specific things that you have to do around inventory parts for those kind of programs. Sometimes it can be a little bit of an overkill for typical sign shop management projects, and especially if those systems are really rigid. And that's a huge problem.
If I had had the money to develop what I thought every sign shop needed, because we were a big electric sign shop, so we would have definitely, a SignTracker would have ended up being your bullet point number 4. But thankfully, and especially back in those days, development was so expensive. So for us to launch the app, it literally would have cost hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. And it would have only served about 5% of the signage, because most sign shops, they'll do a channel letter set or a small cabinet or a small ADA project. But most sign shops are, banners, digital printing, flatbed cutting, and so as we kind of rolled out SignTracker piece by piece by piece, my business partners and I, we did it by listening. And thank goodness we did not build that big, giant, complicated thing, because it would have flopped. It would have just flopped. But because we just put out, a small piece, got feedback, hey, add this. I think if you did this, and, taking that and sort of, analyzing that data, right, and figuring out what's going to be the most next best impactful tool for us to build, we landed with SignTracker, which turned out to be just a pretty simple platform. Some shops that, are, multi-million-dollar shops that are doing, tons, especially electric sign manufacturing, maybe, at some point they do graduate to a full ERP system.
Sure.
But most, seriously, 90% of sign shops don't need that kind of complexity. That's for sure.
Correct. And, features that matter. I put a lot of thought into this, and I do talk to folks that are kind of old school and, I don't want to have anything that's cloud-based. Let me tell you, cloud-based is the way to go. I can connect anywhere I want. I was on vacation and I just wanted to look at our SignTracker metrics board, and I logged into the admin account on my phone and I could see exactly where we were at for the month. I just absolutely love that. And your software is getting updated while you sleep. So like when we come out with a new feature for SignTracker or Inksoft or Inktavo or any of our products, we usually roll that out in the middle of the night on Sunday night. You don't even know it's been updated till you log in the next morning. You're not having to install software. You get a new computer. You're having to track down the disk and then the 7 service patches so it gets up to date. Lower IT costs. You don't need an IT department because you're not having to install software onto a computer, and also all the data security stuff. Better visibility. You can know what's happening in the shop from anywhere you want to go. If you're on vacation, you're on the cruise ship, and you want to log in on your tablet and see what the dashboard looks like, you can do it. Anything else you want to say about cloud-based?
My daughter Elizabeth and I just recorded a podcast on Monday, and it was a panel. We had 2, and we're going to roll this one out, so hopefully you guys will catch it on Behind the Signs. But we had 2 sign shop owners. Both live near the beach in Florida and run their businesses, one in Tennessee and one in Vermont. And they run their businesses like they're in the office in their shop. because they have tools that allow them to access data from anywhere. And so, and these are mature shops, right? They have, shop managers and stuff, people that they trust. So they build good businesses, but because of cloud-based software, obviously they can literally spend half the year on the beach running their business. I'm jealous, actually. I don't know, Craig.
Sounds great. So job tracking, critically important. I think one of the things that, every shop management tool has is some form of project management, job tracking. What you see on the visual right there is what we call the job flow board in SignTracker. If you're familiar with programming a little bit, it's a Kanban style board for just tracking job stages, like how things are rolling through the shop, and, having clear stages so that match your process, not forcing you to use somebody else's process, is pretty darn important. And I think that's a good example of the flexibility that Joe built into his SignTracker from the very beginning. And your team should know what they need to do when they come in the day. Salespeople should be able to look at the opportunity and quote stack and see, oh, wait, there's a blocker there. What's that say? Waiting on art. I can't get it into the art department until I track down the source art from the customer, like the logo. That faster communication, because we're seeing statuses on the jobs, and any kind of blockers are being posted in an application. And most applications will have some kind of a flagging system to push things to the front or to elevate things that have a higher priority. And so being able to, pick up, bottlenecks, all the credit to you, Joe, for the amount of work that you put into the job flow board, which I would say is the marquee function of SignTracker. What's your thoughts?
Any software that you choose to run your shop, you need to be able to see, one, where the job is in the workflow, two, who's doing what on that job. I think that's critical. And then three, is there a centralized place where you can manage all the assets of the job? And when I say assets of the job, I mean, whether it's notes on the job, whether it's all your production files and art files and copies of permits or signed contracts or whatever, your system needs to be able to do those three things rather well, and hopefully simply.
Quoting is massive. And I cannot tell you how many times I've talked to a shop owner and they have only one person in the entire company that can quote. And their business is literally held up or backed up because of quoting. Yeah, and it's always the owner.
Yeah.
Or they have a full-time estimator because it's a trust thing, right? So they only trust, because there's money involved, one person to do it. And when I talk to those shops, a lot of times, most of the time they're working off of spreadsheets, but a lot of times it's coming out of their head. So I talked to a shop and they invested in SignTracker, and it was really, really hard for them to let go of that as the business owner. I get it, but the business was being handed off to a younger generation. And I told the business owners, like, listen, if you want to be able to retire and not have somebody texting you all day long or calling you, let's systematize your quoting process. So literally anybody in your shop can quote, and then we'll set up a job stage where the quote doesn't advance until you put eyes on it and approved it. Right. So we'll take all that knowledge and know-how that you have in your head, we'll turn it into a digital process in terms of loading materials in and formulas and all that stuff and templates. So you can just start with the template and tweak it. So fast and accurate quoting, super important. Consistency. Are you making money? I'll ask that question to shop owners. Do you know if you're actually making money on a job? I said, I think so.
Hopefully any, quoting app that's worth its salt is at least showing you what you're making on materials, on labor, on the job overall. But I always tell people too, when it comes to quoting, even if the owner, because a lot of times it's the owner that does the quoting, all the quoting. And even if you're not at a point where you can afford a full-time estimator, what's nice about a tool that allows you to create templates is that I always encourage people, create the templates for the simple signs first, right? So if you do banners and yard signs and real estate signs and stickers, create templates that allows, anybody that picks up the phone and talks to the customer to whip out a quick quote, give somebody a price, or email a quote to that person. Even if you felt like, if you set the templates up, you don't necessarily have to have eyes on every single one if it's a simple sign. But what that does right off the bat is it frees you up as the owner, or if you do have an estimator, the estimator, to spend more time on the complicated jobs, to really make sure that you're not going to lose money. Because if a banner job goes wrong and it's a small 4x8 banner and something gets misprinted or whatever. I mean, it's terrible, but it's not the end of the world. But a channel error set that you quoted and misquoted and then installed could wipe out the profit for 10 jobs if something goes wrong. So it gives the owner more time to work on the complicated projects for quoting.
Yeah, and it's interesting. In this slide, there's a screen grab of a quoting worksheet in SignTracker. And the way SignTracker works, you have materials database, labor rates, it's in a database, and then you create quoting templates. So you only really have to quote something once because every quote after that is going to come from a template that you're adjusting. Handle custom work. Everybody quotes different. You can't have a rigid quoting process. One of the things I think it's critically important you look into anytime you invest in a shop management software, is it going to be able to adapt to the way I quote, or am I going to have to be forced to quote the way it thinks I should quote? And I talked to a customer that was using a competitor's product, and he was just sharing with me that they do a specific type of foam board sign, and they do it two-sided. And the quoting template that was built into their software only, they used to have a two-sided option, and for some reason they didn't update. They lost the two-sided option. It was only single-sided, and he had no ability to manually override that. And he talked to the tech department for this software company, and they said, well, nobody prints those two-sided. Well, he's like, well, I do. So it'd be a pretty easy fix in SignTracker.
What I think is cool about SignTracker too, we built it originally because, of course, when I owned SignTech, it was all spreadsheets quoting, but a lot of times you have just a blanket markup on a project, right? So it'll feed your raw materials and it'll feed your labor costs in, and you'll have this X markup. But the way SignTracker is structured is you can have a separate markup on the category of materials, raw materials. Then you can have a separate markup on the category of your labor rates. And if you use formula items by the square footage or upright inch, there's tools in there for that too. But again, you can have a separate markup on that. Special order items, and you can have a different markup on that. At the end of the project, it's going to give you a grand total of what you're making on the job. But it's nice to be able to see, like, hey, on materials X, on labor X, on special order X, and make adjustments. Not only build the template with those preset markups, but to make adjustments in a project, right? So like if you're doing, this is going to be super simple, but let's say you're doing a banner project and the banner's $200 and the client wants a banner stand and your default markup is 100% markup, and there's more wiggle room in there. You can right on the fly change that markup inside the job to 125% and make a few more bucks on the job, and it won't hurt the original template that you created because everything you do inside the job is just a copy of that template. So, but when I had my second sign shop with my daughter, we lived in SignTracker. So it was always nice for us to be able to see what we were making per category inside the quote worksheet.
When I'm talking to clients and giving them advice about setting up like their quoting templates, I always tell them, you can put a little bit of markup in the raw materials before you mark it up in total in a quoting worksheet. So you can say, I'm going to drive 5% on top of my banner material because I got to accommodate for inbound shipping, which kind of moves around a little bit depending on how much I'm ordering, and then also a buffer against tariffs and things. But then I still mark up the quote 100% on materials. So I've got that buffer built in there. So contract approvals from estimates, you got to create as little friction as possible getting that customer to give you the thumbs up. It's got to be frictionless. And I think the days of emailing somebody a PDF and hoping they open it and email you back, and then, are you 100% sure that they agreed to this? I think that's generally a bad idea. I think having a system where, it's an electronic DocuSign type of situation, what you're seeing there in that screen grab is the DocuSign style feature that's in SignTracker for signing, approving, or declining. And if somebody clicks on sign and approve or design, the project manager and the secondary person that's assigned to that job is going to get an email that says, hey, this was declined or approved, and then I'll also update the status in the program. So, you want to have that clean handoff to production. So you don't want to pass it off to production until it is signed off, because we don't want to start certain things until, we know the customer's agreed to it. And also customers come back and they change their mind and they say, no, that's not really what and I'm like, hey, you approved this. Here's a copy of your approval. Fewer missed details. And ultimately, I think what it comes down to is a better experience for your clients. It's just professional.
Yeah.
It is a professional. DocuSigning and approval is a very pro way to do it versus here's an email or a handwritten work order that you have to sign. Pretty old school, still works, but it doesn't project professionalism to your customers.
it's not just something you're managing in like a attachment PDF. Cause I know these days I try not to open attachments because you never know what it's going to melt down on your computer. But when you're setting up the job as an owner, you can tag yourself. If you have a project manager or an office manager that processes jobs, you can tag them. And as soon as the client signs off on this, poof, you guys get an email saying, hey, guess what? Joe just signed off on his banner sign. So, and 2 people get it. So it's surely not going to fall through the cracks. And then right when you click into it, right when you click into that approval link in the job, you can at that point, like right from the screen, move it to the stage for pre-production or production, or however you have your stages set up. So it's
you can also copy that link into a text message too, which is kind of a slick way to do it. Material and labor tracking, it's fundamental. And one of the things that I find, which is always kind of interesting to me when we set up new shops, is sometimes the very first time that they really put together a list of their materials and what they actually cost is when they're setting up their shop management tool, like SignTracker. And so we have a very easy system for doing that. We have a spreadsheet, basically a layout with 4 columns. You can just copy and paste the data in there. We give you templates so you can start. There's already populated information. I think you'll see that as a theme across most sign shop platforms. You want to absolutely make sure that that database is hyper customizable to your categories, the way you organize things. Again, that's protecting your margins. And so it's only as good as the data you put in. So if you do get price increases, you want to go in and update, those so they're reflected in your materials database. Definitely allows you to spot issues really super early and make better decisions. You're quoting something out and you notice that you just had like a 40% increase in this material because it's coming from company X, Y, or Z. You can have that conversation with your customer and saying, hey, listen, we had a price increase, so we're going to have to increase your end product by XYZ. And, you have the justification to do that because you're looking at good data when you do that quote, because it's going to show up when you look at your profitability in that quote and you didn't adjust your margins on there, you're going to see it.
As you are managing material costs, what's kind of cool about the way this works is that if you, because you manage all this on the back end, this isn't, and then it feeds into the jobs. But if you do change your material pricing, it does update all your quoting templates that you set up to. So you don't have to worry about like going into a million different templates and updating materials. You just do it in the material section.
Great point. And what you're seeing on the screen capture here, this is just like, there's 4 tabs: materials, labor rates, formula items, and then taxes. Taxes, if you're connected to QuickBooks, taxes are going to come from your QuickBooks in SignTracker. But this is the foundational data that's going to be used to create a quoting template. And what Joe was talking about is once we create that quoting template, we're going to quote off that template. If we do update the database with a higher cost, those templates will update as well, so we don't end up misquoting somebody. This is, to me, this one's huge. Centralized file storage. I've managed art departments for, a good portion of my career, searching around for files, the right files, being able to see them so you have previews that are accurate to the file without having to open it. These are like really important things. I talked to a shop that had a denial of service attack on their server and they lost all their artwork for 30 years. And they thought they had backups, but apparently they didn't. And so when they're doing reorders for their customers, this is a sign shop, they would have to literally tell the customer to send them a photo of what it looked like, and they'd had to recreate that. So having that secure, offsite file storage, with cloud-based centralized storage, but don't undersell the power of having previews for those files. One thing that's cool about SignTracker, it generates accurate previews of the files without having to open them in like an Illustrator or Photoshop. You can see what it's supposed to actually look like.
It does convert that thumbnail for SVG files, AI, CorelDRAW, any PDFs, of course, PNGs, and all those files, of course. But the other plus to that too is it's not a folder structure; it's a tagging structure. So each of those files are tagged, so it can be like final production, initial design, or permit files, or anything. So every file for that job is always with that job. And so when you archive it, if you have to go back sometimes, in a year, it's a reorder
Right.
from you can clone the job. But what's really cool is if you're managing tasks on jobs and assigning tasks to people, like you can assign the task to a person that says print banner, and right from the task list, they can click into the job, go to the files, see final production, open it up, download it, print it. And it's just, it creates, it's a lot it's a lot better of well, organized and consistency, like you say here, Craig. So it creates a place where there's not as much errors. That's for sure.
Yeah, and you'll see in the screen grab, what you'll see is there's little tags. One is photo and one is final production. So if I click on final production, it's going to show this file. If I click on photos, it's going to show the mock-up. And then there's a little download button in there.
And you can even make little notes on the files too, which is nice. So if it's like a production file, you maybe you have some special instruction for the person that's doing the routing or the printing or whatever. So you can even write a special note on each file, or it's something you want to remember.
Or if you're screen printing, something with UV ink, and want to put the ink colors in there.
Yeah, anything. Yeah.
Yeah, and then editable business forms. Don't sell this one short. Sign shops are form heavy. There's forms for everything. Site surveys and change forms and landlord approval forms and all the other forms that are involved. And so a platform that'll have forms that are built in that are editable and fillable is, I think, a pretty big advantage. I can only speak for SignTracker as it relates to that. There's hundreds of forms that are cooked into SignTracker. And once you start filling these out, whether it's on your phone or your tablet or in your Mac or Windows, it's going to save them into the job folder in SignTracker. So jobs in SignTracker are like a digital filing cabinet. So it'll have the art attachments and the notes and the quotes and all that. Saves a ton of time. And Joe, is it fair to say that you've put a few hundred hours into these forms?
Oh yeah, a lifetime. And I always encourage people too, like when you get into SignTracker, just go, start a job and then go to the form section, because that's where you'll find them, and just open them up and just see how they'll help your shop, because there's pretty much a form for almost anything you could think of doing. So
yeah, I learned something a couple of weeks ago. I was talking to a shop and I was showing them the sign design templates that were cooked into SignTracker, and every shop management program handles this particular problem differently. Some people actually hard-coded mock-ups and templates into their application, kind of forces you to use their tool. I kind of find that, me as I have a graphic design background, I would just rather take a PDF or Illustrator file and bring it into Photoshop and Illustrator or even to CorelDRAW and do my own thing versus being forced into a mock-up tool in a software. But having these brilliant, beautifully constructed vector line illustrations of technical drawings is huge. And so what I learned from the customer is that they were paying somebody $150 a piece to do these for all their jobs, to do their permitting. And I was like, and they looked at this and they're like, these are already built. And I said, here's the best part is the person that's signing off at the permit, they're not going to read all the schematics from the technical drawings, but it just makes you look like a pro. Imagine $150 a pop every time you have to get something permitted on an electrical sign. It sounds like a drain on profitability to me. And so getting those approvals done faster, realistic visuals. If you sign up for a SignTracker trial, you'll be able to access all of these. You can download every single one. It's on us.
We worked with a technical designer to do all these for us, and they're really beautiful templates. You can download them, like Craig said, they're all vectorized, and you can edit them and add your own logo and all that stuff. But when we first loaded them up, this is a few years ago we did this. Some sign shop called me and said, "Hey man, you're not going to believe this. We just sold a channel editor job, and it was a competitive situation, but they went with us for one reason, and it was because they said your technical drawings made you look really professional. So that's how they got the job."
Yeah, it's huge. And every shop management software will have a different way to address this. I haven't seen a platform that has the level of detail. There's 270 of them, of the ones that are built into SignTracker, but it is something that I think it's an extra, maybe we'll call this an extra benefit to having certain types of programs. And it's certainly an extra benefit to SignTracker.
Templates in there too for simple signs. I mean, tons of banner ones and yard signs and site signs, vehicle magnets, all the way up to very complicated ones like channel letters and wall-mounted cabinets and monuments and pylons. And so it just really depends on the kind of work you do, but there's a huge library there. So
yeah, and what you're going to do, you're going to import those vector PDF files into SignLab or to FlexiSign or Corel or Illustrator, and you're going to make them your own. You're going to customize them. You're going to add your logos, add, delete, color, all those kind of things. These are vector files. This one's a little tricky. Basic CRM functions, and I hear this from customers all the time. Do you have CRM functions that are like Monday or like HubSpot or Close? And I have a simple answer to that. We're not a CRM. I use a CRM every day. I use Close.io. I love it. It's great. It's a super complicated program. There's a lot of overhead. It took me a long time to learn it. Now that I learned it, it's my daily driver. I really enjoy it, but I don't need those functions inside of my shop management software. What I need to do is be able to store accounts, track a sales pipeline, track my quotes,
Job history is the big one.
Job history, knowing like what happened where. Like in SignTracker, it's interesting. I'm just in the CRM and I'm looking at the contacts and I can see all the jobs that are open for this particular customer. So these are in opportunity phase, these are in design phase. So that's actually gone past quote approval. Here's all the employees. Here's the main person. And all this data is coming from QuickBooks. So if you look at every sign shop management software, will have the ability to import a CSV or a data file from another program. Maybe it's another CRM or an Excel spreadsheet. They can all do that. In the case of SignTracker, it's a little different because it'll sync with QuickBooks. So if you create a SignTracker contact in SignTracker, it'll show up in QuickBooks and vice versa. And everything stays nice and synced up. So I would not be an advocate for a super complicated CRM. I think you have to check the right boxes. It's important. But if you really need something for your sales team to track pipeline, what I would be inclined to do is invest in a HubSpot or a Close or a Monday, and then link the job because it's a web app. You can put a link to the job in your CRM. That also supports your everyday quoting, because salespeople, they have a lot on their plates. They're trying to keep their pipeline moving, so they kind of want to see what's going on with the job. Having a salesperson be able to have a custom view in your software and they can just click into all the jobs and see exactly where the progress is. I think that it cuts down on a lot of interruption.
There are some basic CRM functionalities. You can make notes, you can create events, you can click their email links and it'll launch your email browser to send them emails directly out of the system and stuff. So there are some basic CRM functions.
I have very strong feelings about this one, and because I'm the man on the streets. I'm talking to shops all week long. I do 12 to 15 trade shows a year, and so I'm talking to a lot of people that are running a business. And one of the most common things I hear is, I've been using this software forever. I don't really like it. I'd like to get out, but I'm stuck with it because my accounting data is in here. And what causes that? A lot of the shop management platforms have cooked in accounting. They have their own accounting functionality. And when you have cooked in accounting, if you want to be able to continue to access that data, like say you get an audit, you got to keep paying them, because you can't get into your account if you don't keep paying them. And so people stay with a platform because they can't get their accounting data out. And that, to me, that's really problematic. And Joe, I think it's safe to say that when you built SignTracker, your idea was, I don't want to hold anybody hostage with accounting data. QuickBooks already does an amazing job. Why don't we just integrate with QuickBooks Desktop and Online and Enterprise? And you can just take your quote that you created in SignTracker, push a little button that says create invoice, and just map it to all the right places in QuickBooks. It's over there. You can send the payments out of QuickBooks, the way you normally would do it, and everybody's a happy little camper. So I feel like QuickBooks integration is super, super important. And most of the shop management platforms have it, but they don't all do invoice level integrations. Having the actual invoice level integration is actually super important. And I think, to me, that's table stakes. That is a absolute red flag for me. If I'm looking at a program and they are going to force me into their accounting system, I don't have the ability to get my quotes and invoices into QuickBooks. That's, for me personally, that's a big turnoff. I don't know how you feel about it.
We built this kind of slow, right? And got a lot of feedback. And we talked to a lot of shops that used QuickBooks and they wanted to continue to use QuickBooks. So it was easier to say, let's not mess up people's accounting systems. And then shops that we talked to that were using software that just you would do a journal entry or whatever, they didn't like it because, like you said, all their accounting was in this other system. And if they ever went to change, like, what do? They have to keep paying for it. So we just decided to build it in a way that you do the quoting, you handle your materials, and all of that in SignTracker, but just with the push of a button, you push that sold contract over to QuickBooks for invoicing, and then it creates an invoice that matches the contract in SignTracker, and from there you can do all your receivables and stuff. So, and then if for some reason, God forbid, you ever decided to leave SignTracker, I hope that never happens. But if you did, it's just a matter of that's it. Once SignTracker shuts off, it won't interfere with anything in QuickBooks at all, ever. So you'd never have to worry about this system messing up your QuickBooks.
Role-based permissions, I don't want to spend a lot of time on that. Every software is going to have something like that. And that is designed to keep the people that don't have any business looking at sensitive financial data away from that data. And also the people that are the day-to-day workers in the operation, they're really only going to be concerned about the things that they need to do.
Yep.
They don't necessarily need to be looking at money in quotes or creating quotes. And so having permissions based on the person and what their role is within the organization is standard across most programs. I would say SignTracker takes it a little bit deeper than that, because we can set up views, and the employee not only has permissions, but they can set up unique views. So they're looking at the job flow board, only the job stages that really apply to them. So the art department, they just want to look at their design job stages. They don't really care about looking at, all the quoting stuff or all the production stuff. They just want to focus on their stuff, so they can change their view on the job flow board to just their stuff.
Mm-hmm. And then the most important, like you said, is the financial data. So you can choose if you want employees to see quotes, or maybe you just want them to see the client contract, or none of the above. You can select all that. So
any program you guys end up with, you really need to have an account for every person that is going to be tasked with something or be held accountable for something. Because if you don't do that, it really, in my opinion, it kind of defeats the purpose of having a shop management tool. You're not saving any money. And in my opinion, you're not reaping the full benefits of a shop management tool.
I mean, that's the point of having it, right? So that everyone can use it, and it's to keep everyone on the same page. So
correct. So reporting and analytics, where are we at? Are we making money? What are some trends in the business that are positive or negative? Where are delays happening? We need good information so we can see, about investing in equipment and growth. Reporting needs to be simple and easy to understand. You should be able to track your sales pipeline. So these are the kind of reporting things that I think are pretty much essential in any shop management tool. And this is a little screen grab that shows you, SignTracker pipeline, work in progress, job summary reports. They just want to see, what did we do last month? Or job history. And that's where you're going to spot bottlenecks in the job history, because all of the little stages and tasks and things that were completed in that job are going to be time stamped into that report. So you can see exactly what happened. Anything else you want to say about reporting and analytics, Joe?
I mean, other than the fact that because it syncs so well with QuickBooks, the way the contracts and the line items on the contract sync into QuickBooks, if you really wanted to dig in deep on financial reporting, because of how it communicates with QuickBooks, you'll be able to do, that more in-depth financial analysis in QuickBooks because of how SignTracker sends the data.
So what smart shops know, there's no perfect system. People get hung up on that. They're looking for a shop management solution, and it has to check. It checked. I just had this happen with the customer. We checked 99 out of 100 boxes, but he was just absolutely hung up on one box we didn't check. And we had a great conversation. And basically the net result of that was, okay, well, maybe there's a workaround that we could deal with, because all the other things that it's doing are exactly what we need. It's just we do this really special thing a certain way, and it doesn't quite accommodate that. And so you're going to have that with any software system. You got to kind of always start with your immediate needs and work backwards. It has to your table stakes, kind of core things. It's got to be able to do those things, but it's probably not going to check off every box. And we talked about being careful with built-in accounting. You heard us talk about that enough. CRM overload, we talked about that. But here's a huge one. Adoption matters more than features. You can have the most rich feature set on the planet, but if your employees don't use it, and your system fails. And so it's having the features that people will use in their day-to-day. And the one thing that I consistently see with SignTracker users is they use 100% of the platform. They literally use it they're paying 100%, they're using 100%. And that's certainly not the case with every software tool that you use, whether it's shop management software or graphic design software, whatever you're using. So I think adoption is really important, and you should talk to other shops. One of the things that we started doing recently is putting together shop profiles of people that have been using SignTracker for a long period of time. And these are folks that are willing to talk to our customers and endorse the product. Get some referrals. If you're going through your process of discovering what solution works for you best, post on one of the forums. Post on Behind the Signs Facebook group, that Joe hosts. You'll get a lot of answers. It won't necessarily be 100% for any platform, but you'll get a lot of answers, and everybody's got an opinion, right? So I think getting feedback from other shops is pretty important.
One thing about, I think with SignTracker especially, or Inktavo in general, is that the support that's offered for helping you be successful using the tools, any of the tools, You'll have a success manager assigned to you. Craig does amazing, upfront teaching about SignTracker. I do weekly webinars, live webinars you can access from the dashboard. You'll have a success manager and a support person assigned to you. So if you wanted to set up training for your whole team, there's multiple people that can help do that. So anyway, you're not alone in the journey, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So
the benefits of getting it right: faster quoting, better scheduling, fewer mistakes. That's huge. Stronger teamwork. Everybody's kind of clicking and working together, and then you get more capacity. And I always talk about that. If you have a good system that is tracking and helping you to allocate resources, like people resources as well as equipment resources, then one job's ending and the other job's beginning, because you have it lined up, it's stacked up. You have a good system. You have scheduling. You can see everything on a digital whiteboard. These are all the things that are tangible benefits of implementing a good shop management solution. Cost and ROI, don't sell short setup time. You have to get through it. Yeah. Setup time for any solution that you're going to do, you're going to get as much out of it as you put into it. So spending the time to load your materials and get your pricing organized and what your costs are from vendors, and putting some real thought into what your labor rate should look like. Make sure you're allocating some time to train your staff so they get off to and running. Our setup process is pretty simple, and we hold your hand and walk you through it. And I think working with the company, whoever you guys end up with, that really addresses that onboarding process in a human way I think it's huge. Paying for unused features, you want to pay for a software 100%, use 100% of it, or at least 80% of it. I think that's really important. And you're saving time. So ultimately, when you're investing in software tool, what you're paying for is you're getting your time back. That's what you're paying for, and a little bit of sanity. So, where do you get that time back? You get it back on quoting, scheduling, tracking becomes faster, fewer errors, one costly error.
Yeah, no. And I think, all your points here are really good. When I think about ROI and the cost of implementation of a system, and, when is the right time, and all the things we just talked about this past hour, it's even almost more important to start with a good system than it is to buy that next piece of equipment, or your first piece of equipment, even, because you can always outsource the fabrication for a while as you're kind of, learning the business and learning to organize jobs.
What is the cost of not implementing something, right? So avoid these mistakes. Complexity. I talk to a lot of shops, and when I ask them one question, it's a really great question. It's, how much do you love your shop management software? If they're using something, how much do you love it? And I rarely ever find somebody that says, I love my software. And then, I'll ask them, if you go, what is it you don't like about it? Well, it's too complicated. I can't get my team to adopt it because it's too complicated. I get a new employee and the onboarding is so cumbersome that it's like a drag for us every time we hire somebody new. We paid a whole bunch of money up front for a quote setup fee. And now I don't want to leave because, I don't want to waste all that money I paid on a setup. Training, you have to allocate some time and give your employees some space for training. It's super important. If you spend the time to set up your account and you put together the right training plan, which will help you with that, or any shop management software should absolutely help you with that, then you can be successful. So ultimately, you want a piece of software that you do kind of fall in love with, that becomes your daily driver, and it's just the way you do things. And it's always gratifying to me when I talk to customers. I did 3 customer interviews this week for customer profiles on our website. You can go to signtracker.com, click on resources, and you can read all 3 of them. And these are people that are pretty loyal SignTracker users. And one had processed 17,000 jobs, one had processed 21,000 jobs, and one had processed 6,500 jobs through SignTracker. Those are real numbers. If you're new to all this and you're kind of going through that journey of picking out a solution, and you've kind of found that what you're doing isn't working, and you're trying to find a solution, sign up for a trial. Just sign up for a SignTracker trial. Just go to signtracker.com, sign-tracker.com, sign up for a trial, give it a whirl. Test out our human side with click the support button. You can book me for a walkthrough if you want to do that. I'll make that offer available to you. So, so why shops are choosing SignTracker? It's built for our industry. It's built for sign shops and wrap workflows. You can adopt real quick. It's not a huge, massive task to implement, so you can get it rolling really quick. It's a cloud platform. We don't have setup fees. There's no contracts. It's every customer's month to month. You sign up for a trial, you're like, hey, this is awesome. You pay for your first month and you're like, man, this is just the way we're going to do it. Then convert your plan to an annual plan. You get a 10% discount. People do that all the time. And every SignTracker customer starts out with a trial. What makes this different? Built by a sign shop owner, somebody that did the same things that you are doing every day, that understands how it works in the real world. Purpose built for the sign industry, for the wrap industry. It's not some hobbled together general project management tool. It's tailored to the way sign shops actually work. Not overloaded with complexity. It's nice and clean. It's simple. Your employees could grasp it pretty quickly. And it's flexible and adaptable. And that's probably a testament to the way Joe's brain is wired. Because Joe just wants people to be able to have that flexibility. And if you want to do it a certain way, we're not going to force you to do it another way. And I think that having to have a software that makes you conform to its rigid way of doing things would be very aggravating to me. And we hear that pretty frequently for people that are using other platforms. That's a very common one that comes up. Anything you'd like to add there, Joe?
And just that, I guess since we're tooting our own horn right now with SignTracker, it's always been this way since the beginning too. It's like, I don't consider SignTracker just like a software product. It is, but we're also it's a partnership with you. We really care, I think, a lot about your success, because we're successful when you're successful. And I love the sign industry, and I love when sign shops are scaling and it's sustainable. And so we're definitely here. Our team is here to help for sure.
The right system creates clarity, consistency, and control. Everything aligns with your team. Things run smoothly. You're going on vacation and you're not getting those 10 text messages, and you open up an email in the morning, you're like, yikes, right? Your shop can grow. Connected shops grow faster. There's less drama. Things move smoothly through stages. You can take on new business and you can grow without, having to have the pain of having to keep all that stuff in your head and being reliant on memory or whiteboards or Excel spreadsheets or however you're doing it. When a tool is simple, it improves adoption. And simple doesn't correlate necessarily to powerful. A tool can be very powerful, but it can also be simple. And there's also, I think, a lot of beauty in simplicity. And I would say SignTracker really nails that one. When I talk to shops and, I talk to employees in shops, they love using SignTracker. And I asked one customer that, and when we were at the ISA show, and she said, yeah, because every time when I come into work on the day, I know exactly what I need to do. I know what's lined up for the day. I'm not waiting around for anybody telling me what to do. I can just come in and pick up where I need to and start my day. A clear path from chaos to order, a purpose-built workflow keeps you organized and profitable. Pretty important. So it's great. You can be super organized and not making any money. Profitability is key. And a smooth running shop gives you back time, because ultimately what you're buying, and anytime you invest in technology, is time. You can't replace it. Once it's passed, it's passed. And so we want to have you running a really super efficient, well-oiled machine. We feel like we have a great technology to do that. And in terms of giving you back time, we're done. And so we're going to give you back your day. And I'm going to give it over to Joe for a few closing words, and we're going to wrap this up.
I guess, Craig, just thank you to everyone that's joined us today. We appreciate very much having you, and look forward to hopefully working with you in the future. So the sign industry it's great. It can be hectic. It can be hard. You guys are running shops, So choose the right tool, choose the right partners, and let's build something a little sane and a little scalable together. So.
Yeah, and if you want to check out SignTracker, just go to sign-tracker.com and sign up for a free trial. All right. So Thank you again for joining us here today. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.